Security cameras captured a group of teenagers assaulting a 7-Eleven employee during a robbery last night. According to Baltimore police, they have reviewed the footage and are still searching for those suspects. The incident is raising renewed concerns about juvenile crime in the area.
Another day in Baltimore brings us another story of a group of teens, specifically teenagers. It's important that you guys understand that we have no other description of these individuals other than the fact that they're teens walking into a 7-Eleven, committing a violent flash mob robbery that left the owner of this particular 7-Eleven, or an employee, I forget which honestly, with a serious arm injury, and of course ended up leading to serious amounts of damage to the store and to inventory. And this is just something that has become normal in the city of Baltimore and a bunch of other cities across this country. Now, of course, you can attribute this in large part to the fact that Maryland passed a series of laws at the statewide level that basically makes it impossible to hold these teens, these youths, these innocent Baba Angel Aladdins just trying to steal in order to feed their starving family, from actually facing the consequences of their actions. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Yeah, Maxine, I spoke with the store's manager this morning. He says this type of crime involving young people breaking in, shoplifting, threats of violence, he said it happens almost all the time, at least giving about once a week, he estimated. And now with summer just around the corner, he's afraid that the lack of consequences they're seeing could lead to a rise in crime.
So a couple of things about what this local news reporter just brought to us that I find incredibly interesting. First and foremost, you ever notice that when you talk to people who actually have to deal with criminal types over and over again when they're conducting their regular ordinary business, that their takes on the criminal justice issue are quite poignant. They're quite accurate. They're very reflective of what I tell you on this channel, because in this particular case, these teens, these non-description worthy teenagers, ended up doing this particular crime, but it's not the first time that this has happened. As they said earlier, this essentially happens at this location at least once a week, if not more. And this particular 7-Eleven location, we are going to learn, has taken a number of precautions in order to prevent this from occurring, a number of limits on the store that may be unusual to you if you live in a normal, non-crime ridden area, and none of that has deterred the criminals. And in fact, what this person has ultimately ended up concluding was that maybe it is the lack of consequences for the criminals that have led to this crime happening over and over again. And because there are no consequences, it's going to get significantly worse leading into the summer. Now, compare and contrast that to what your disconnected, woke progressives will tell you about criminality, and essentially they'll make the case that these are innocent Baba Angel Aladdins that are only trying to steal from the 7-Eleven in order to feed their starving family. Oh my God, what are we gonna do other than search out and arrest poverty for this particular crime? Because if it wasn't for poverty, if you really think about it, these teens wouldn't have nearly broken the arm of this guy who worked at 7-Eleven in order to loot his store and have a good time while doing it. Now, of course, there's more to this story that we got to get into, but again, just keep these thoughts in your mind. What your left-wing progressive tells you about criminality versus the actual people on the ground that are being victimized by these criminals, by these nondescript criminal teens.
It was like terrible.
After a long night in the ER spent waiting on x-rays.
I'm thankful like it's not broken, but I'm into the painkiller.
Now look, I'm going to play a little bit more of this video, but I do want to say that this guy is thankful that his arm isn't broken. I am happy for him that his arm isn't broken. He appears to have suffered a sprain, and that is what they are reporting. But I did find it funny that he says, oh, I'm grateful it's not broken, and I'm into the painkillers.
But I'm into the painkiller.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure the painkillers are giving you a very much good time, especially since you have to basically go back to this place of business, work in this particular store, only to expect these criminal teens to arrive at this location in, again, under a week. This is a weekly occurrence for this 7-Eleven, and since there were no arrests, he could very well be victimized by the same exact perpetrators that showed up to this location prior. Like the same people who sprained his arm can waltz into the store the very next day after this guy starts work and attack him again. This is what is going on in these locations across the city of Baltimore. This is the consequence of a soft on youth crime criminal justice approach. And by the way, I've commended District Attorney Ivan Bates for coming into office. He's a Democrat, by the way, after Marilyn Mosby, and prosecuting repeat offenders with firearms in order to drive down the homicide rate. But the fact is, when state laws like are true in this particular instance, protect a certain category of criminal, and and those criminals in that category commit a disproportionate wild amount of the crime, this is the result of it. Everyday working people who are just managing a 7-Eleven location are being victimized, and again, they're being put in danger because who wants to go to this 7-Eleven if they're constantly being looted by a bunch of aggressive teens?
Amrit Karki, the store manager of this Canton 7-Eleven, located along Boston Street, returned to work this morning to play back the attack on the store's security cameras.
Things are getting very, very worse, especially with the kids.
He says Sunday night around 8, about a dozen teenagers enter the 7-Eleven and begin stealing items off the shelves. Karki tries to limit them to 2 people inside the store at a time, but says they wouldn't listen. That's when the thieves turn violent.
And I said, you have to pay for that. Then he started pushing me. I just end up with slamming my arms into the wall.
Karki says he's grateful a sprained arm was the only injury sustained.
So yeah, I had to freeze frame this video because YouTube's terms of service is what it is, and they will basically suppress this video and call it extreme violent content, even though in this particular instance, it's some shoving, it's some grabbing, it's definitely violent and definitely should be taken seriously, but it is not anything graphic or anything of the sort. But as you can see, he sees all these teenagers starting to steal from the shelves of his particular location. He attempts to try to actually limit them from entering the store because he knows what time it is. He knows that it's going to be a problem. But then these shoplifters that are often painted as innocent Beba Angel Aladdins who are just stealing to feed their starving family, they're just fighting the oppressive capitalist system that keeps them in poverty, viciously attack this guy. Again, they gang up on him, throw him against a brick wall, and all of this is for junk food and other merchandise at this location. And you can actually see the female 7-Eleven employee behind the counter. She's scared. She's not stepping up in order to help her manager, and I understand why, because these teenagers have already shown that they will escalate to violence. Now, I will also point out that each and every one of these suspects is at large. Each and every one of these suspects, in theory, the police should be looking for. But what does Fox 45, a news agency that I'm often praising on this channel, end up doing with this footage? They're blurring the faces of the suspects. They don't blur the faces of these 2 store employees. Their faces need to be out there, but the thing is, they're not hiding. The police aren't looking for them, but for whatever reason, these youths, these teenagers, have their faces blurred. Their identities are being concealed. These are violent individuals who attack somebody at a 7-Eleven over some crap merchandise, and they're getting the cover from the media. And I understand it's alleged. I understand they haven't been convicted, but we are quite literally watching a video of them commit the crime, so you're protecting the identity of the perpetrators of these criminals, talking about how in the story nobody's been arrested yet, and we're supposed to accept this as normal. This is supposed to be a rational thing that is going on. And I will point out for everybody out there in the audience that there is a racial component to who gets blurred versus who doesn't get blurred. We have this wonderful video, and again, you can see the juxtaposition in New York City, same news agency both times, and one of them is the perp walk of Daniel Penny, who, by the way, was clearly and obviously engaged in self-defense, and the other one is a perp walk of somebody who is accused of actually being a murderer, somebody that the police were trying to arrest for a long period of time. That guy gets blurred. He happens to be a black individual, while Daniel Penny's name and face get broadcast all over the internet. Look at what these news agencies are doing. Look at what they're trying to hide from you. We all understand, or at least we should understand if we actually want to address the problem, that black teenagers aren't just generic teenagers. They're the ones committing these crimes, and they need to be held accountable. And I will just point out that you're not helping black people at all whatsoever when you're censoring them, when you're covering up their faces, because these people who snap and commit this violent crime this quickly against a 7-Eleven employee who asks them to pay for the goods that they're taking are also committing violence in their own neighborhoods against black people. Law-abiding black people that just want to go to work, raise their kids, are doing the right thing in the city of Baltimore, but they're constantly impacted by the consequences of these teenagers' criminality. Again, people pitch these policies as fighting against evil white racism. There's evil white racism under every mattress, apparently, in this country, but the reality is when you cover up for these criminals, you are disproportionately hurting black people and other minority groups that live in areas with elevated crime rates the most. They are the most impacted by this. This is why I'm often a fan of playing this clip about luxury beliefs.
So what is an example of a luxury belief? Well, in 2020, the defund the police movement gained a lot of momentum, and in early 2021, YouGov ran a survey and found that overall, Americans were very much against defunding the police. But when they broke down the results by income category, they found that the highest income Americans were by far the most supportive of defunding the police. There was another survey of just Democratic voters and found that white Democrats were far more supportive of defunding the police than Black and Hispanic Democrats. And so as a result, despite the fact that most people didn't want this, many cities across the U.S. subsequently reduced spending for police departments. And this has contributed to the violent crime wave that we've seen over the last couple of years. So in the U.S., relative to those who earn $75,000 or more per year, the poorest Americans are 7 times more likely to be victims of robbery, 7 times more likely to be victims of aggravated assault, and 20 times more likely to be victims of sexual assault. It's important here to understand that to not stop crime is to actually victimize the poor. This is a luxury belief.
When you break down the polling on people's beliefs related to the police, what you discover is that the people in favor of defunding the police, the people in favor most of these soft on crime policies, are those who are the most disconnected from the reality of crime on the ground. The greatest predictor of whether or not you're going to support defund the police is whether you make over $100,000.
Well,
Karki says he's grateful a sprained arm was the only injury sustained, but argues assault and robberies at the hands of young people are becoming all too common.
they're not scared of anything. They think like it's fun.
Again, compare the take of this random individual with the sprained arm who is a manager at 7-Eleven, who, by the way, is a little bit high on the painkillers that they gave him at the hospital, to any of your top tier, most viewed left-wing political commentators.
Brought up shoplifting earlier. You can actually pull up an article to find out that the same 300 people in New York City represent a third of the shoplifting arrests total for a single year.
Probably because
This
they're
is because they're
incredibly
repeat offenders.
impoverished and they need to find a way to actually sustain their livelihoods in this country.
They're not scared of anything. They think like it's fun.
And you tell me who's more accurate at assessing the problem. You tell me who understands the criminal more. You're hyper-educated, progressive with all the production value around them, or this guy right here. He's like, yeah, it's like they're not scared of anything and they do this for fun. They're laughing while they're committing these crimes. And then you have the lefties who don't experience this, who wouldn't be caught dead in this 7-Eleven in Baltimore at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, let alone at 12 o'clock at midnight, saying, oh, well, you know, it's just poverty and the kids are just struggling and oh my God, their lives are so sad and we shouldn't think about the sprained arm or the terrified employee or anything of the sort. What we should talk about is how 7-Eleven is an evil corporation and these innocent Baba Angel Aladdins are only doing this in order to feed their starving family. Again, you don't gang up with a group of 12 or more people, flood into a store, grab potato chips and snacks and sody pops, maybe a little bit of beer here and there because you can't afford to eat. The reason you do this is because you know there's no consequences for it. It's because you're having fun. You enjoy inflicting pain on people. You enjoy stealing, which is why throughout the course of all of these stories, the one thing that is often in common is the fact that they're laughing while they're engaged in this. They're having a good time. It's entertaining for them. They're doing it for fun, not because their lives are so difficult.
The store used to be open 24 hours, but recently started closing its doors between midnight and 5 a.m. to deter the uptick in crimes like these, which Karki believes will only continue heating up once students are out of school for the summer.
We're really concerned about that. It's like every other week, or like, I would say that every week. Not only this place, I think many other places too.
Look, I live in New York City, but I've also traveled around the country, and the one thing that is usually constant around this great nation is that 7-Eleven is open 24/7. 7-Eleven is a place that you could walk into, buy your milk, buy your bread, buy your little pizza snacks and your hot dogs, whatever you want to buy, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So a lot of people might find it difficult to imagine that these 7-Eleven locations in these terrible neighborhoods can't be open 24/7. They have to break the mold of their company, close their doors, and the reason for that is because the crime is too out of control. But of course, they've already taken these precautions. They've already tried to prevent this from going on, and what is the consequence of that? What is the result? The criminals show up at 11:30 instead of after midnight because they don't give a damn. They're trying to victimize these people, and the reason they keep doing it is because there's no consequences for doing so.
Again, police say that they have not made any arrests in this case, but that an investigation remains active and ongoing. Meanwhile, BPD also says that about 2 weeks ago, 2 cash registers were stolen from this exact same 7-Eleven here in Canton, located along Boston Street. Again, no arrests in that case either.
So our local news person, Rebecca Pryor, tells us that 2 weeks prior to this particular report, cash registers were actually stolen from this 7-Eleven location, and then she reminds us that there were no arrests made in this particular case and no arrests made in that crime either. And I will just point out that it is very likely that one or multiple people involved in this particular instance were involved in that instance, and because there's no consequences, they know they can just keep coming back to this 7-Eleven and initiate these robberies, initiate these assaults, and basically do whatever they want without consequence. Now, I will also add that the fact that they will not show the faces of these perpetrators who are still at large, they're gone, they have fled, they're in the wind, they are victimizing somebody else and probably have victimized a dozen somebody else's at the time that this local news segment came out, but they still won't give you that information. They still won't tell you who was behind this. They still won't show you because, God forbid, somebody out there in the audience actually recognize these perpetrators, actually know who this is, actually phone in a tip, and then all of a sudden, these innocent Baba angels will be arrested. I mean, the laws in Maryland are set up in such a way that it's barely possible to hold these teens accountable for their crimes. It's barely possible to put them away for any amount of time, and yet they are deciding to aid and abet that with this editorial decision to blur the faces of the perpetrators. Again, if it's after the fact and you want to have a policy of innocent until proven guilty, and you don't want to give people the wrong idea that the people on video that are stealing and assaulting the 7-Eleven manager might actually be guilty of the crime that they're accused of, and you blur the faces, then that's one thing. But this is while they're at large. This is while the most amount of information should be presented to the public so we can get an arrest. But what we see is that they're covering it up. They're hiding it. And it's absolutely shameful to see this from Fox 45, the same local news agency that gives us Project Baltimore, because otherwise they do an absolutely stellar job in their coverage and a stellar job in their reporting. But for some reason, these alleged teenagers, these unidentified urban youths, get the cover of the blur. They're able to get away with this time and time again. And to make matters worse, other people can see the faces of the store owner, or the store manager in this particular case, and the employee. So if they want to target them for calling 911, they get the full cover to do so. But the broadcast actually shows the face of the woman behind the counter and this particular manager. So all of the exposure goes to the victims. Anybody who wants to take revenge on them for going to the local news about this is free to do so, but the criminals, the perpetrators, they get the protection of the blur, and I find that to be outrageous. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a flash mob robbery at a 7-Eleven in Baltimore. Till next time.